My name is Dirk van Zyl. I'm a professor of mining engineering at University of British Columbia. And I want to welcome you to this lecture on mining legacy and historic sustainable development initiatives. Some of these are quite recent, but it's still historic that I want to cover in this lecture, and I will then move on to other topics in the rest of this lecture series. I want to talk somewhat about the mining legacy issues that we're dealing with, and then go on to talking about two very important initiatives over the last 20 years. The first was the Whitehorse Mining Initiative, and the second one was the Global Mining Initiative and the Mining, Minerals and Sustainable Development project was part of that. This has been published about for a very long time. This specific quote out of Agricola's De Re Metallica, which was published in 1556, already indicate that the Italians had a problem on their hands, and they suggested that besides this, meaning some issues in terms of mining in Italy, the strongest argument of the detractors is that the fields are devastated by mining operations, for which reason formerly Italians were warned by law that no one should dig the earth for metals and so injure their very fertile fields, their vineyards and their olive groves. Goes on to describe some of the impacts to these lands, and then also says that further, when the ores are washed, the water which has been used poisons the brooks and streams and either destroys the fish or drives them away. And finally, then sort of the conclusion that says, thus it is said, it is clear to all that there is greater detriment from mining than the value of the metals which the mining produces. So this was written in 1556, and I think there are places in the world today where one can observe mining, especially on very small scale by individuals that would still live up to this description. On the other hand, if we see some of the very large operations, then one may feel that there's also a certain amount or quite a large amount of disturbance happening. There's a change in the landscape, but it doesn't have to have a permanent impact on the landscape. An interesting part is that if you look at Agricola's book and all the lithographs in there, they're beautifully done, and this is a copy out of it. But the thing that impressed me about this lithograph and many others, or many other illustrations in the book, is that they always depict the mine sitting in nature and very often close to a community. There's a town in the background here that you can see, and so you really have this much better feeling of the interaction of mining, environment and communities. And this is something that we always have to keep in mind, that mines are not just about large pieces of equipment or big volumes of material that's being moved, but it's actually dealing with the land and with people all the time. Historically, other legacies out there is that if you think back on the early Roman mining in Spain at Rio Tinto, there are some references that they might have used slaves and maybe even prisoners to do the mining for them, and that has left a legacy. Mining leaving behind extensive environmental damage. There's still a number of sites in North America and many other countries where there are abandoned mines with significant environmental damage that, that is very difficult to come to grips with. Mining is seen as a high hazard occupation, and people are not always aware of the good safety records of many mines. And in most countries, or in many countries today, the safety records of mining is actually a lot better than of other industries. Mining, there's a perception that mining is focused on money and not on the environment. That mining is not focused on communities. If you look at what happens in parts of South America, in Peru, and a number of neighboring countries, people would say that mining causes conflicts. And so there's all of these legacies out there about mining that doesn't always help to make it possible or simple to develop a new mine at the location. Here's an interesting one about the conflicting ideas about environmental protection and employment. This is written up by somebody in Peru over the last few years. In a recent national opinion survey, people were asked to evaluate environmental responsibility by mining companies in Peru. A great majority, 75% of them, said mining companies didn't protect the environment or prevent pollution. Interestingly though, when asked how mining companies should support local populations, 49% indicated by providing more jobs, while only 3% indicated by protecting the environment. So there's definitely this conflict that you see, maybe I should call it tension more than conflict, but this tension that exists between, especially in developing countries, between environmental protection versus jobs and employment opportunities. And this is part of the overall role that mining can play, but also help to set up all these legacy issues and all the tensions that we deal with in mine development. There's some modern legacies as well. If we think over the last 50 years, the environmental movement really started in the 1960s worldwide, and we can argue where it started and how it got fueled. But mining-related regulations at the federal and state levels in the U.S. Have been fairly strong since the 1970s, not consistently through the whole country, but there are fairly strong regulations in place. The mining industry has never really taken the lead in change or in changing. Instead, there's been resistance and using of legal processes not to change. It's very difficult for a mine with a long life of 10, 20, 30 years to actually go through changes in regulations that would affect them to the point where they may have to do things completely different from what was done before. And so there's been this resistance to change. The impacts or complicated regulatory issues also makes it very difficult for mining companies. And so the mining industry doesn't always step up to accept responsibility for these past impacts. Communities are not engaged and consulted in new mine development. This is changing, but the typical approach was, even in the very recent past, not to really consult communities significantly in the development of new mines. Abandoned mines and their associated environmental impacts and costs to the communities. These costs can be both economic, but can also be due to health issues and safety. And so this is a legacy that's a physical legacy that is still out there. There are mining-related illnesses that people have dealt with and still dealing with, some related to uranium, some related to coal, some related to other areas, but that is a legacy that is out there. And overall, there's often the feeling that the mining companies, and therefore by implication the whole industry, cannot be trusted, that they will not do what they tell you they will do or that they tell you they do. And so there is that underlying tone that people are struggling with. And the big issue is that overall the industry is judged by its worst performers. So if there are companies that do not perform well, then that will actually cause a ripple effect on the whole industry. So let's talk a little bit about a couple of initiatives. And in both cases, these initiatives were initiated because of these pressures that mining companies and the industry felt from both regulators as well as from society and in general, that they are not welcome to develop new mines. And so this was all really, it was part because of the legacy issues. And I think it was also part because previously people have not had these broad discussions across stakeholder groups, including where they would include society as well as regulators as well as others, even in cases they're opposition, if we want to think of non-governmental organizations in those terms. And I need to clarify that not all NGOs are necessarily against mining, but this is clearly another issue for big discussion. And so lots of words here, but just indicating that the Canadian mining industry, when they set this up, this was actually written as part of the documents. It says the Canadian mining industry is facing major economic, environmental and social challenges as it prepares to enter the 21st century. This was written in the early 1990s. And the specific challenges are complex, and they go through describing those challenges. And then the Mining Association of Canada took the lead on behalf of the mining industry to set up this multi-stakeholder process, and a proposal was made to the mining ministers, and at their annual conference in Whitehorse in 1992. And at that point, the ministers agreed to co-sponsor and also become the trustees of this process, and they named it the Whitehorse Mining Initiative. So the representative of 5 sectors of society agreed to participate. Very important. The industry, senior governments, labor unions, Aboriginal peoples, and the environmental community. So this is a very, very significant step. This was the first time in Canada, first time in the world really, where those 5 groups came together to discuss the whole or a number of issues around mining. The process was that it started in February of 1993, and at the end, when it was all completed, a leadership accord was signed on September 13, 1994. So this was a project, a process that went on for about 18 months. The organization was basically a leadership council, a working group, and then 4 specific issue groups were put together. One on finance and taxation, another on environment, a third one on land access, and a 4th one on workforce, workplace, and community. So these all of these groups reported back, and their vision was of a socially, economically, and environmentally sustainable and prosperous mining industry underpinned by political and community consensus. It's interesting when you look at this vision. It is very much mining industry oriented, and so but this was early days. This was really beginning to come to grips with these issues, and I think it speaks to the fact that this was set up and promoted basically by industry associations, and that's why it's so industry centric. However, the outcomes were very significant. There were a series of principles and goals identified for each of these topics: business climate, financing, taxation issues, overlap and duplication, government services, environmental protection, planning and environmental assessment, and then use of information and science and environmental decision making. So it was a broad range of topics. All of these documents, fortunately, got kept, and they're available on the web. And I recommend that you go look at that. They also another series of topics, and land use and land access, about protected areas, mineral tenure, attracting and retaining skilled workers, maximizing community benefits from mining, Aboriginal lands and resources, Aboriginal involvements in the industry, and an open decision-making process. And then there were separate reports from the 4 issue groups. So this was a very intensive activity, and had a very, very important contribution, both from a point of view as being a multi-stakeholder activity. So you actually had to sit down with people that in the past you might have considered not friendly to you, from both sides. The community's not considering the mining companies friendly to them, mining companies not considering some of the groups around the table friendly to them, but they realized that they had to form these multi-stakeholder groups. The sad thing is that at the end, all the paper was generated. You can go read about it, you can look at it and say, wow, now these are good ideas. There was never full-scale implementation of the Whitehorse Mining Initiative. I think it was a major opportunity missed and a lesson learned, that if you're going to have such a wide-ranging activity, visualize up front what the outcome of that could be. How would this be implemented, and how would this be put into practice as you move forward? So then the next big initiative was really the Global Mining Initiative. And the Global Mining Initiative, as I said earlier, was started by 9 mining and metals companies that the CEOs came together in Davos in '98. I've seen conflicting ideas whether it was 98 or 99, but they came together and they developed this process over a number of months, and they also opened it up to other mining companies to work with them. But the whole Global Mining Initiative was started in 1999. It consisted of 3 parts. The first part was a process that looked at mining associations and mining councils, and the fact that internationally the mining community felt that there was nobody that somebody could call to talk to the mining industry. And you know, people would argue it's still the same, but I would argue not. And we'll, as we move on, we'll talk about that. But the big mining companies saw this need to develop a central place where they can actually speak with a fairly authoritative voice. So they looked very hard at mining associations, and in the process decided to take the model of the ICME, which was the International Council on Metals and the Environment, which is fairly narrowly focused on the environment, take that model and apply it to the whole industry. And out of that then was born the International Council on Mining and Metals, and this was moved to London, where it's still headquartered at this point. So that was the first activity. The second activity dealt with an independent process of consultation and research, and that became known as Mining, Minerals and Sustainable Development. This process went on for about 2 years. The starting meeting was early April of 2000. Final report was published in May of 2002. It's a very active project, and we'll talk some more about it on the next slides here. And then the third part of the Global Mining Initiative was a conference entitled Resourcing the Future, which was held at the end of this in Toronto in May of 2002. As indicated in a previous lecture, all of this was also meant, and is pointed out in the beginning of this slide, that this was preparation for the 2002 World Summit on Sustainable Development. And so while this study was very important, both from an image perspective, it was also important to make sure that the mining industry, the global mining industry, will have a voice at the World Summit on Sustainable Development. So this was MMSD, as I said, was this independent 2-year project of research and consultation. It was headquartered in London. The project was actually managed day-to-day by the International Institute for Environment and Development, and they were contracted by the World Business Council on Sustainable Development, which was the way that the mining companies funded the project. They funded it to the World Business Council on Sustainable Development, and the WBCSD then contracted to the IIED. The whole team was, the day-to-day management was by Luke Danielson, but the overall person that put this together and was an advisor throughout the process was Richard Sandbrook. It was supervised overall by an assurance group of 25 officials from different backgrounds and regions of the world, and a final report called Breaking New Ground, and all the supporting documents are available on the IIED website. I would recommend that you look at this. This is a large amount of material. A number or a large percentage of this are very high quality, and so there was this broad international focus on the hard rock mining industry. The process included regional partnerships and national projects and global workshops and commissioned research. There were 4 regional partners in Southern Africa, North America, Latin America, and Australasia, with very specific regional focuses such as HIV/AIDS in Southern Africa. There were topic-specific projects that contributed to the final report, and very special attention to stakeholder processes. We can talk for hours about this project, but I recommend highly that you go look at the website and look at some of the topics and some of the reports that are of specific interest to you. The total budget for the project was about $8 million. At the end, There was participation by 25 plus mining companies and many other organizations, including universities and consultants. The biggest benefit out of all of this was it generated a wide-ranging discussion on the topic of mining and sustainable development in the hard rock mining industry. This was really the impetus to create, over the last 10 years, a very lively discussion in this whole arena for governments, regional as well as national governments, to support this, as is presently being done in Australia and Canada, and to move forward on the broad sustainable development agenda. There was also active implementation of this. The ICMM activities promote the implementation of the MMSD results. And we will talk about the ICMM in future lectures in the series. But this was a firm implementation of MMSD, and so this was not just left to sit on the shelves. The final report is available, and as I said, I recommend highly that you actually go look at this website. In the report, MMSD suggested these sustainable development principles in four spheres. First, the economic sphere. Maximize the human well-being, ensure efficient use of all resources, seek to identify and internalize environmental and social costs, and maintain and enhance the conditions for viable enterprise. And again, suggest you go back to the report and actually look at these very hard. On the social sphere, ensure a fair distribution of the costs and benefits of development for all those alive today. Respect and reinforce the fundamental rights of human beings, including civil and political liberties, cultural autonomy, socio-economic freedoms, personal security, and seek to sustain improvements over time. Make sure that the depletion of natural resources will not deprive future generations through replacement with other forms of capital. So this addresses the issue of strong or weak sustainability, and if we want to, we can say that MMSD came down on the side of weak sustainability. In the environmental sphere, promote responsible stewardship of natural resources in the environment, including remediation of past damage. So this is cleaning up the legacy issues. Minimize waste and environmental damage along the whole of the supply chain. Exercise prudence where impacts are unknown and uncertain, and operate within ecological limits and protect critical natural capital. Okay, so in a way, some of these emphasize again what we discussed in a previous lecture on mining and sustainable development concepts, and some of these go a little further to actually give us further guidance. It was interesting that the governance sphere, which has never really been that strongly identified as a sustainable development arena, at least in mining until MMSD, that this one really has the largest list of principles. Support representative democracy, including participatory decision making. Very important. Encourage free enterprise within a system of clear and fair rules and incentives. Avoid excessive concentration of power through appropriate checks and balances. Ensure transparency through providing all stakeholders with access to relevant and accurate information. Ensure accountability for decisions and actions which are based on comprehensive and reliable analysis. Encourage cooperation in order to build trust and share goals and values, and ensure that decisions are made at the appropriate level, adhering to the principle of subsidiarity where possible. The last one basically implies that if the decisions for a specific project, say a mine, according to the laws and the regulations of the country, if those decisions are to be made by regulatory authorities, then don't go to the company or to the country president and ask the president to overrule the regulatory authorities if they do not agree with what is being proposed. So again, some very, very strong ideas that are put together here in terms of how the governance sphere should work. It's also very interesting to note the emphasis on democracy and free enterprise. Some key challenges that were identified by MMSD, and these actually ended up being the chapter headings as well. It's the viability of the industry, control and use and management of land, minerals and economic development, and how one would handle that. How you would look at local communities and mines, mining minerals and the environment, an integrated approach to using minerals, access to information, a huge issue, artisanal and small-scale mining, and then the whole sector governance, the roles, responsibility, and instruments of change. So, great series of topics, great series of challenges, and quite frankly, over the last 10 years or so, 9 to 10 years, we've struggled with many of these issues. They're not going away. We are trying to improve on all of them, but it is just, these are the challenges that are still in the works today, and we're trying to improve and do things better. They suggested that to support sustainable development in the industry, step one is first understanding sustainable development. That, I would argue, is still a key issue and not that well implemented. Step two, creating organizational policies and management systems. Step three, achieving cooperation among those with similar interests. And four, building capacity for effective actions at all levels. This was sort of a wish list. Part of this was taken up by ICMM. Part of it has been taken up by other groups, maybe not in exactly these forms, but there was never sort of this bigger plan to take these specific steps and implement them on an international basis. So a few concluding comments. First one is that stakeholder processes like Whitehorse Mining Initiative and MMSD provide a forum for wide-ranging exchange of ideas. Very important. It helps to establish relationships and a framework for ongoing discussions. The language for ongoing discussions is established. People begin to understand the vocabulary, they understand the underlying themes, and there's a better understanding about the expectations of various stakeholders. These processes overall generate very useful reference materials for academia and for others to help a better understanding of the issues and create a foundation for future activities. Just an interesting sidebar here. I was part of the North American process of MMSD, and it was very, very interesting when we had a big meeting in Canada of a multi-stakeholder meeting. We had a multi-stakeholder meeting in the US. Because of the Whitehorse Mining Initiative that was previously run in Canada, to sit around with people from the Aboriginal communities, from NGOs, from communities, from government, was not a new experience in Canada. In the US, some of that was a new experience, and there was less transparency in the discussions that we had at that specific meeting in the US. As the process developed, the comfort level increased, and there was much more lively discussion as we move forward. But that is one thing that these processes do, is they actually help foster this interactive approach to solving problems, this multi-stakeholder approach that is so necessary to solve these very, very difficult issues around the contributions that mining makes to sustainable development. Thank you.